Donald Trump has never been a particularly popular politician with the wider American public, at least by historical standards. His poll numbers have generally lagged those of his predecessors, and fell sharply in the first few weeks of his second term. However, until quite recently, it was probably fair to say that Trump was outperforming expectations electorally. His poll numbers were actually slightly better than they had been in his first term, and solid economic data in the second and third quarters of last year gave way to some optimism among Republican strategists that they might be able to hold on to not just the Senate, but also the House in the upcoming midterms. Today, however, that all looks too optimistic by half. Trump's approval ratings have cratered, and the Democrats are now the odds-on favorite to win both the House and Senate in November. So in this video, we thought we'd take another look at Trump's poll numbers and explain why they're cratering. If you've read George Orwell's 1984, you might remember the book's three powerful superstates, covering today's US, Russia, and China. In the latest issue of our magazine, we're considering how these Orwellian spheres of influence are taking shape, and whether we're entering a new age of empires. That's just one of the 72 pages in the magazine, because as always, there's more to too long than you'd expect. Purchase your copy by clicking the link in the description. So let's start by taking a look at what the polls are actually saying. At the time of writing, Nate Silver's aggregator has Trump's approval rating at a second-term low of just below 40%, with his net approval rating, that is the percentage of voters saying they approve of Trump minus the percentage saying they disapprove, down at another second-term low of negative 17.3. Another well-regarded aggregator by data journalist G. Elliott Morris, using a slightly different methodology, has Trump even lower, with his net approval rating at negative 21, far below any of his predecessors, including Trump 1.0, at the same time in their term. This is basically on par with the Economist's tracker too, which currently has Trump at a net approval of negative 20, again well below his recent predecessors. This cratering in the polls is the main reason that the odds of the Democrats winning not just the House but also the Senate at the midterms, a prospect that once felt really quite far-fetched, has ticked up markedly. According to Polymarket, for instance, the odds of a so-called sweep for the Democrats are now slightly higher than evens, at 51%, up from about 25% last year. Now, as always, we should remind you that Polymarket data ought to be taken with a pinch of salt, but it has nonetheless proved a pretty accurate forecaster in the past, and this is a more liquid and thus more reliable market than most. Anyway, you get the idea. Trump is slumping in the polls. So what's driving this? Well, unsurprisingly, quite a lot of this has to do with the war in Iran. This becomes particularly apparent when you look at Nate Silver's aggregator, which shows that the recent decline in Trump's poll numbers really began in early March, just as the war kicked off, with his net approval rating falling nearly 5 points since. Now, at this point, you might be saying, well, obviously, starting a war in the Middle East without a clear exit plan when you campaigned on no more wars isn't going to help your approval ratings. But when it kicked off, a lot of Republicans claimed that the war in Iran wouldn't actually be bad for Trump's poll numbers. This was in part because they thought that Trump's MAGA base would ultimately get behind him. And to be fair, this is exactly what has happened. As we detailed in a recent video, Republicans that self-identify as MAGA overwhelmingly support the war in Iran, although more recent polling suggests that their enthusiasm might have waned ever so slightly in recent weeks. But more structurally, these Republicans thought that as long as the war is more popular than Trump, it wouldn't be a negative. And, well, at the start of the war, this didn't look like a crazy theory. Polling suggested that about 40% of Americans approved of the war, while about 50% disapproved, giving it a net approval rating of negative 10, a few points above Trump's own net approval rating. Furthermore, this electoral strategy has worked in the past. According to at least some pollsters, Trump was able to arrest the poll decline that he suffered late last year by intensifying his immigration crackdown, which drew voters' attention away from economic issues, where Trump was deep underwater, towards immigration issues, where Trump also had a net negative approval rating, but where he's doing better than on any other issue. In other words, even though his immigration policies were unpopular, they were popular relative to the rest of his presidency, so it made some tactical sense to double down on them. Unfortunately for Trump and co, this strategy doesn't seem to have worked this time round. So what went wrong here? Well, the first thing to say here is that focusing on relatively popular, but still unpopular issues isn't a surefire way to bolster your poll numbers. Sure, Trump's war in Iran enjoys a better net approval rating than Trump himself, but that doesn't necessarily imply that it'll bring his numbers up towards it. You could imagine, for instance, some fraction of the 40% of people who approve for the war being Democrats, who would nonetheless never vote for Trump, while some of the 50% of people who don't approve could be Republicans, who are so appalled by Trump's apparent betrayal that they decide to flip Democrat. It's worth noting, however, that the Iran war itself has become less popular over time, and its net approval rating as an issue has fallen from about -10 to more like -15 today, according to Nate Silver's aggregator. But the main reason for this difficulty is the fact that the war in Iran has led to a de facto closure of the Strait of Hormuz, through which something like 20% of the world's oil and gas usually passes. This has, unsurprisingly, pushed up global energy prices, and with it, gas prices for American consumers, with retail prices touching $4 a gallon a couple of days ago. And this is probably the real reason that Trump's approval ratings are crashing. As the 2024 election made abundantly clear, American voters hate rising prices, especially ones as visible as gas prices. This would also explain why Trump's numbers on the question of inflation specifically have cratered in the past couple of weeks, with his net approval on the issue reaching an all-time low of -33 this week, according to a G. Elliott Morris aggregator. Unfortunately for any Republicans trying to keep their seats in the midterms, things don't look likely to get better anytime soon. In his much anticipated address to the nation on Wednesday, Trump signaled that he'd be escalating his war in Iran, and that the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz was no longer America's strategic priority. Oil prices jumped on the news and will continue to rise if traffic through the Strait of Hormuz doesn't get back to normal anytime soon, especially if Iran escalates against the US, either by trying to close the Bab el-Mandeb, something they threatened to do recently, or by striking further energy infrastructure in the region, which is something that we should expect them to do if the US tries to, in Pete Hegseth's words, bomb Iran back to the Stone Age. Now, there are a lot of big players involved in this story, and it's no secret that the world we live in is run by big players like these, but not just in the world of politics. Big companies also have a complete monopoly over the world we live in, and avoiding them is kind of out of our control, as they seep into every part of our day-to-day life. But what if we told you that you could get some of that control back, starting with your email? I know you're thinking, my email? How much will that actually help? Well, your email is personal to you, and it's important to keep hold of what's yours. Most messaging apps make sure to let you know that your messages are end-to-end encrypted. So why do emails deserve any less? Well, thankfully, Proton Mail offers a solution to this. It's a private, secure alternative to big companies like Gmail, and will give you everything you need to be productive while also keeping those pesky ads away from your inboxes. Although it's more than just the annoying ads, it's the fact that every single person is born with privacy, but now that privacy is essentially non-existent because of our digital world. Today, children begin building their digital identity before they're even born, without them even having a choice. Email inboxes weren't created to protect children. They were designed to collect data and feed that information into AI systems that will shape the way they're categorized and targeted for life. That's where Proton Mail's Born Private campaign comes in, as they offer a complete generational reset, giving you the opportunity to reserve an email account for your child. Their account can easily be reserved today, and it can be secured and protected for up to 15 years. This will give your child a secure digital start from day one, as when they're ready, their inbox is waiting, private, clean, and fully theirs. So if you want to take back your privacy, or protect the future privacy of your family, start using Proton Mail for free using our link at proton.me/bp/TLDR, and you'll be one step closer to a fully protected online experience, free from data exploitation.